Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another ITwire.com and Alex on Tech Video. I have with me today Fernando Serto. He is the Head of Security, Technology and Strategy for the Australia, Pacific and Japan region of Akamai Technologies. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Alex.
So I thought we'd start right at the beginning and ask you to remind us about everything Akamai in 2018 and some of the things that you're doing now that you didn't do when you started all those years ago.
Yeah, sure. Akamai is the largest cloud delivery platform. We operate the most distributed platform in the world, so we run 240,000 servers, present in almost 150 countries, and we've been in business for about 20 years. But my role, being a security practitioner in Akamai, has obviously been only focused on the last few years of our security history. So for the last 15 years, pretty much, Akamai has been in the security industry. There's been lots and lots of acquisitions along the way, and obviously I've been in Akamai for the last 4 years, and it's really exciting to see the innovation that we have had in the last 4 years as well.
And what's a small example of that?
We started on our journey in security to start hiding origin servers from the internet and also mitigating large distributed denial of service attacks. Now, if you look into how the threat landscape has evolved, we are on our 6th version, about to release the 6th version of our web application firewall, which is a market leader, as recognized by both Forrest and Gartner now. We're also doing a lot of, as you've probably seen on our report on credential stuffing. So we're helping customers to mitigate bot attacks as well. We got into our zero trust journey as well, helping customers in the last year and a half to transition into a world without VPNs and how to allow them to better utilize the resources that they already have.
And of course, Akamai is well known for its state of the internet reports. As you just mentioned, the latest one is Volume 4, Issue 4, looking at security credentials. But before we get onto that, just give us a wrap on the reports as well, because they've been a long-standing feature of Akamai and of great benefit to the industry.
Yeah, so we've been running these reports for, we started with the State of the Internet report, which is really pretty much looking into, how mobile networks perform all over the world, what the challenges that everyone had with, the whole conversation about digital transformation and, having applications being delivered over the internet. And very quickly, our customers started to ask the same sort of questions when it came to security, like what are you seeing? Because if you think that Akamai delivers 30% of the internet, it's a high volume of attack traffic that we see as well on our platform. So about 5 years ago, we started to release these reports every quarter, and last year we changed the focus a little bit because we're still seeing lots and lots of web application attacks, but and also large volumetric attacks when it comes to distributed denial of service. But we saw that because of the change in landscape and all the different services that we launched over the last few years, customers actually wanted to see what was the impact of all of these new threat vectors or attack vectors within their environment as well. So we started to release more specific reports. So they're coming out more often now, but they're very specific on certain topics. For example, the last one on credential stuffing. Well,
let's segue directly onto that. For those who don't know what credential stuffing is, and I'm sure most people watching this do, but just tell us what that is and tell us what some of the key findings from the report.
Yeah, sure. Credential stuffing is what attackers do to, they try and automate the sign-in process on web applications. So that they take databases of usernames and passwords that were in data breaches in places like Yahoo, LinkedIn, and the list goes on and on and on.
Absolutely.
I lost count with how many credentials were already lost in 2018. I mean, there are in the billions.
There are those great websites that tell you if your password's been
correct.
And it's incredible that you get these weird emails from people saying, I've got your details and you were on some porn site and you better give me some bitcoins. And I've had friends ring me about that and they say, look, just ignore it. It's
a different type of ransomware there.
Yeah, crazy. But that's 2018.
Yeah, so we started to see, the need to launch services that would actually mitigate against these attacks, and being able to very accurately differentiate a bot from a human. So, we're tracking things like, mouse movements on the screen or the gyroscope on a phone, accelerometer, and that type of stuff. And we're able to very accurately tell the application if it is a bot or a human. And depending on what that result is, we're going to serve a particular type of content.
So, you know, where does Australia sit in the amount of these credential stuffing attacks? And, you know, with botnet, how do we compare with other countries in the world? Are Australian businesses taking this threat seriously?
Yes, definitely. We are. That's been the most successful service that we've launched in the last few years, with the number of customers that are taking up that offering every month. But if you look into it, it's very difficult for us to launch reports that are just based on Australian numbers, because obviously our data, all the logs and all the traffic that we see, it's all based on volume, right? So there's a large volume of attacks against financial institutions in the US, and that was the main focus of that particular report. But just to put into context for Australia and New Zealand, we're seeing, we were talking to a customer the other day on an event that we did at one of the restaurants here in Sydney, and they were telling us that prior to deploying that solution, they were losing $20,000 a day on credential stuffing. So, and this is all attacks that result in some sort of fraud, or gift cards being maxed out on customers and they're having to refund that. So that there's lots and lots of different problems that come with credential stuffing. If you think, from an airline perspective, for example, there's one of the largest airlines here. They were having a big problem with bots as well, where every lookup that you do on a ticket, they actually pay a fee. So there's a thing in the airline industry called look to book. Yeah. And we were able to reduce the look to book fees by more than 10x with just by deploying this solution.
Well, that would have given a return on investment very, very quickly for that organization.
Correct. Yes.
So what are some of the other big security issues that you're seeing in Australia that your technologies are helping to mitigate the fraud or the attacks thereof, in addition to credential stuffing? Yeah,
sure. Well, still on credential stuffing, there's a big problem today with mobile apps, right? So I'm talking to you on an iPhone. Yeah. So the amount of apps that are out there today, and people are launching new apps, and there's a thing that the traffic that runs behind these apps is all running on APIs, which is a different way of constructing queries into databases, or how the applications talk to servers. And
to partners and competitors. I mean, it's correct. It's a very interconnected world.
Correct. And the way people found to make all of these communications work is really through the use of APIs. What we saw was that credential stuffing is not only present on web application attacks, but they're also present on mobile application attacks. And the reason for that is that it's a lot more difficult for an organization to actually pick up and have all the skills to pick up an attack on the mobile API, as it would be on the web application, on the front end of the web application.
And I was just hearing the other day that there are fraudulent apps out there as well. So I mean, it's not just legitimate apps you have to worry about, but fraudulent banking apps and others. And I don't know if you help companies to detect that, but
yeah. So we are today we're helping with how we allow traffic to come into a lot of what we call the origin service for a lot of these banks, but we're helping organizations with mitigating phishing attacks. So if you are within the organization, or you are with a company issued device, we can actually help them and use all the data that we already have on the internet and help them to mitigate either malware attacks, or command and control traffic, or phishing attacks. So if it is someone getting a message from a bank saying, hey, click here to approve a particular transaction, and they are using a corporate issue device, as soon as they click on that link, that connection is not going to be allowed, because it's already coming out of the suspicious database that Akamai runs. So if you think of from a volume perspective, today we run 2.3 trillion DNS queries on our recursive DNS, which runs on several carriers around the world. And we're translating all of that into, what can we use out of that data set to help large enterprises or medium-sized enterprises to mitigate the threat of phishing and malware as well.
It's like cloud-based trust, so that you can use the power of the cloud in your databases to allow companies to make split-second decisions on whether to trust that interaction or not. Yeah.
Correct.
And on that whole trust thing, I mean, you mentioned it before, zero trust, and you talked about VPN. Tell us a bit more about that, because I mean, most people know they need usernames and passwords and multiple factors of authentication. And so, what is zero trust in a nutshell again?
Yeah, so zero trust is if you think of how we've been building networks for the last several decades, which is having that one point of entry or exit into the network, usually that's usually where a firewall sits. So people have been building these network perimeters for several years.
And I mean, in the beginning, there was no usernames and passwords. We were living in it was zero trust because we trusted everybody, but we can't do that anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the relationships that we had in in the past and how the threat landscape has evolved and the ease of use of cloud services and how easy it is for you to scale up an attack and generate a volumetric attack, for example. I think that really played a big part on how everyone started to look for a different model. But Google did a really good job on last year at RSA, talking about how they've been running how they transitioned to run a network without firewalls. And Akamai is actually going through that journey as well as an IT organization. So we have 8,500 employees, so nearly there.
Yeah.
Hard to keep up with the growth.
Yeah.
But we actually transitioning into a world where we're not really going to rely on having all the security controls within the network. So the security controls have to be as close to the end user as possible. So bringing traffic into the network shouldn't really be, opening up ports on a firewall. It should be really a firewall was built to deny all traffic, and that's how we should be building networks from now on, rather than opening it up.
And given the fact that you're having to do this for yourselves, makes it much easier for you to then advise your customers on the journey you've taken, the pitfalls and the successes, and you must have customers asking you for that help.
Correct, yeah. So we launched services around the zero trust methodology at the end of 2016. So last year was really adding capability and adding new functionality. We have customers who really struggle to add multi-factor authentication on their internal applications because they're all legacy applications.
Yeah.
So we're helping customers add multi-factor authentication for every single application, for example, through what we call our identity-aware proxies. And based on that topology, they don't really need to rely on any changes to be made on the application stack itself. It's all done at the authentication authorization process while people are trying to log in.
And look, I didn't preview this question to you, but I've been doing a lot of interviews about AI and big data and machine learning. So you must be doing a lot with those technologies to improve your operations too.
We are, and it's funny because when people started talking about machine learning, especially,
you were doing it for decades, or for years already.
Exactly. So all the intelligence that we have on our web application firewall, for example, comes from that, right? So there's processes that are trolling through huge amounts of log files every day, looking for anomalies, and so we can build rules to better protect our customers. And that's the reason why the top 6 banks in Australia use us as a web application firewall. A few of them are on the journey to have credential stuffing mitigation services added to that as well, what we call bot manager. Airlines, and we're seeing all sorts of industries taking up that, retail, hospitality, and yeah.
And when it comes to AI, that's the first letter of your company name and the last letter of your company name. So you're doing it for a long time. Yeah. So anything else that we should know about Akamai in 2018 and what's coming in the future before I ask you about the actual future itself in a decade's time? Anything else you want the people watching to know about Akamai?
Yeah, look, I think, the amount of innovation that we've had in the last 18 months goes to show that, we're very serious about security. We have been for 15 years, but it's just the amount of how much our security portfolio has grown in the last 18 months is incredible. Right, so if you look into the number of employees just here in Sydney, right, and Melbourne as well, and also other places in Asia. So there's a big take up on our security services, and that's driving a lot of the hiring for us here as well. And innovation drives more innovation. So we're talking to customers, we're seeing the things that we don't do yet, which is part of my role, and feeding that back into products and see what gets built into our roadmap as well.
And it just, as you were mentioning employees, I mean, I remember being at a Thales conference in France, and they were talking about, they've got a cybersecurity division, and I'm talking about how difficult it is to find quality staff. You must be going through the same sort of issues, but then security is a booming industry. A lot of people must be wanting to skill up on it and be part of the solution, not the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because having this being focused on Australia, it's I think the maturity in the Australian market is a lot greater than other places in Asia Pacific. And I cover several countries in Asia Pacific. But we're seeing that even with that maturity, it's really difficult to find people, because as soon as you see good security professionals, they get snapped very quickly out of the market. And but we're doing well with our hiring. We are getting top talent in, It's just that, you know, we can't really find enough at the rate that we need.
So, well, it's an arms race from the good guys and the bad guys, and everybody wants to have the best people so they can offer the best services.
Yeah, I'm hoping that the bad guys are not hiring the security
Well, let's hope so.
Australia.
Yes, yes. Now, I always like to ask about the future, and obviously, you know, I mean, I like to ask about a decade's time frame, and people say, yeah, if I knew what the future would be like, I'd be on the Bahamas with a pina colada. But, you know, will people be hacking into other people's brain chips? You know, that's supposed to be coming sometime in the next decade. You know, I wrote here, botnet running riot across neural networks of people. And maybe that's a little bit too, you know, futuristic. But what do you think about
I don't know, right? If you think that in mid-2017, there was a recall for a pacemaker. There was... 500,000 units, I think, that had to be had the firmware was updated, and it was really due to the risk of a cyber attack. So I don't disagree with you that you know it may happen. Obviously, I can't predict the future, but it's something that, you know, we're seeing with the advent of IoT and you know the amount of sensors that people have everywhere.
And they've been wildly hacked. I mean, the Showdown network shows you all of the devices that have default passwords.
And if you look into most of the botnets that we see attacking our customers, they are coming from IoT devices. Back in 2016, when we saw a massive ramp up in volumetric attacks, that was due to the Mirai botnet that was largely built on IoT and vulnerable routers and devices that people have in their homes.
Well, it'll certainly be scary when people's you know, brain chips and IoT pacemakers are being used in attacks because they're in proximity to a Wi-Fi network.
That's right.
And I mean, you don't want the FBI to say, turn your pacemaker on and off like they did with the routers.
That's
recently.
correct, yeah.
So one of my second last questions that I always like to ask is just simply, you know, we just turn 180 degrees for a second and just simply ask you, what's the best advice that you've ever received to help you get where you are today?
I think I've been involved in customer conversations for several years, and I think one problem that we have in technology, not just in security, is that people tend to latch onto a specific technology.
It's like the hammer and the nail thing.
Exactly, yeah, and they tend to bring a technology into the stack or into the environment, thinking that, you know, hey, this is my holy grail.
Magic bullet.
Exactly. You know, I think the best advice that I've been given was really, hey, try and, you know, look further from just the technology that you're responsible for, that you help, or that your employer sells, but really look into, you know, the overall ecosystem within that customer. And once you become a trusted advisor to a customer, it's very easy for you to build strong relationships with CISOs and CIOs around the place. Yeah.
Maybe you can't predict the future, but you can certainly anticipate it and try and mitigate.
Correct.
So what's
the good thing about us is that, you know, we do see, because of the footprint of our platform, we do see attacks a lot earlier than anyone else, right? So for us to react to a particular type of attack that hasn't been seen before, it's very easy. And I'll give you another example. When GitHub had a 1.35 terabit attack against them a few months ago, we actually saw a few bursts of attacks against a smaller customer. So once that large attack came into play, we already had all the signatures and all the rules in place to mitigate against that. So to have a customer sustaining an attack like that for hours, and still they only had an outage of 6 minutes, which was the time that it took for us and them to get on the phone and actually say, okay, turn on mitigation now, and they were back online.
I was thinking, as you were explaining at the beginning of the interview, that, you know, because you have this global footprint, you must be seeing attacks that are happening in the States or elsewhere, and then you would, tell your Australian customers or local customers in the region, this is happening, we can protect you against it now, you know? Yeah,
and if you go back to credential stuffing, right, so the amount of attacks that we see against our US customers, that's something that our local customers love, because it's a lot more likely that a US-based financial institution will get attacked with a particular vector before any of the banks here. So once the attack shifts to Australia, we're actually already prepared. And on the same token,
if something happens locally, you can warn the guys in the States
correct.
Or elsewhere.
And between all the banks that are already our customers here, right? And not only banks, but as I mentioned, airlines and retailers and, you know, SaaS companies and all that as well.
So what's your final message to ITWire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
I'll go back to the advice that I was given. That, you know, I think we are at a place now from a security maturity in this place where we have to stop relying just on the technology. And I think every business out there should be really looking into cybersecurity as a business risk and not just a technology that they have to mitigate against or a type of attack that they have to mitigate against. I think people need to understand how an attack or how a significant attack would impact the business. Right? So we saw a large shipping company that was attacked by a ransomware a few months ago, late last year, and it took them weeks, right, to recover from that, and that's over $200 million of damages, and they got lucky on the restoration of their services. There's a few really good articles that I recommend people reading on the internet.
At least their IT teams had backups in place. But I mean, if it took weeks, that was still a huge recovery time.
Well, they had one server that was offline in Africa.
Right.
So
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, Fernando Serto, Head of Security and Technology and Strategy for Akamai Technologies, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you can keep protecting us for a long time to come.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.